making
All
that
right, I'll
nervous.
tell you when we're filming, okay?
No. Don't tell me.
This painting.
This painting is called Idol, or that's the working title anyway. When I first saw the image, all of my paintings come from photographs, and when I first saw the photograph of this painting, I really liked how she had this fluorescent, this large square fluorescent light over her head, and it kind of lit up just the top of her head, and it reminded me of paintings of the Madonna from the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, and that sort of halo effect that those old paintings had, but she was wearing these little devil horns, and I thought that was a really interesting contrast. A lot of this body of work deals with pictures that young women take of themselves. And so it's sort of presenting herself both as the virgin and as the whore. From a painting style standpoint, I've been looking a lot at Alex Kavaneski. I follow him on Instagram and went to see his opening in New York last fall, and I really liked how the forms in his paintings bleed into the background, and it creates a sense of movement and dynamism that I was trying to capture in this painting, so she didn't seem so solid. So I altered the photos for dramatic effect or to make better painting. Yes, I did change this quite a bit. The vacuum was sitting there, and I liked it. I liked the vacuum. It's sort of an inside joke around witches and brooms, and a modern witch would have a vacuum, not a broom, right? This is from a series that I'm working on right now. The title, or the working title, is, what did I call it? The Currency of Beauty. Beauty. And what I've been thinking about is young women and the selfies that they take and post on the internet. It wasn't something that I did as a young woman or even do now. And so this particular piece is taken from an Instagram photo, and one of the ideas that came out of thinking about selfies was, okay, so young women take these very seductive pictures of themselves, taking pictures of themselves in mirrors, and put themselves, or make themselves very vulnerable in that way, and it was hard for me to relate to it, and so to kind of work through those ideas, I made a painting of it. I added the bunny mask in this painting. It has a few different references, one Playboy bunnies, but also bunnies are prey more than any other animal that I can think of anyway. I don't know that that's scientific, but bunnies are such vulnerable, cute, fluffy little animals that really all they can do is run away. I just kind of fell in love with the picture, I think, more than it being about her being a clown. Clearly, the mirror was from two different photos, and the young woman took her picture a lot in this particular space that had an interesting angle of the mirror and the person, so you could see the side, and there must be two mirrors in the bathroom, so you've got part of a mirror and part of another. So that part, the angles of it was interesting from a painting perspective. She changed so much as she took these different pictures, and who she is and who she's trying on being fit in with the theme of this body of work, the currency of beauty, because she's sort of trying on these different beauties or different ways of seeing herself and different identities that she's playing around with or performing, in a sense. I use a lot of mineral spirits in my initial layers of painting, and squeeze bottle to often thin out areas of the painting that have gotten too heavy. And so I don't mind drips. I feel like they add to the looseness. I like my paintings to feel almost like an accident. So I'm as you can see by my clothes, I'm not terribly tidy when I paint, and I like moments to be highly articulated and a lot of areas to be loose and fluid, and so the drips and the sort of messy paint allow for that ambiguity. And in previous generations of women, we were the subjects, but we weren't also the photographer and the curator and the editor. We get to be all those things now. We get to decide what picture we put out there and how we put it out there, and the publishing medium. So we control the whole stack. Where, in previous generations, we were just the model, and so it gives us a lot more control. So in one sense, young woman isn't following the societal norms as much as a young woman in Prey. She's deciding her own image and how she wants to be in the world in a way that doesn't necessarily contrive or doesn't necessarily fit those social conventions of what's beautiful. This painting is called The Feminine Mystique. The Feminine Mystique is a book written by Betty Friedan in the 60s, I believe it was written, and it helped me really understand my mother and why my mother is the way she is, and women that grew up of that generation, what they felt bound by and how they thought of themselves in relation to feminism. I saw her as actually the release of the woman in the front. So this was a time when there was a lot of change. In the 60s, there was a lot of change happening, and women were finding a new sense of freedom. And so there's the woman that's following social convention in the foreground, and coming out of the background is this new sense of freedom, of self-expression, and free to be who you want to be in the world. That was based on a photo I found, and I found that to be somewhat disturbing, the way that she was holding her child that way, and that the child looks like a doll, not like a person. Like she's forcing this young girl into a convention and making her stand still. Maybe she's making her stand still and not wriggle for the photographer. I'm not sure. I thought that was a very interesting part of the painting. Well, it was much more of a historical thinking about feminism and remembering what people went through and helping me understand my mother's generation. So women that grew up in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and came of age in the 40s and 50s, and how their perspective and all of the progress that they made for us now, that is sort of let's not forget all that we learned in those times. I mean, when I was a kid in the 70s, there was seemingly a lot more freedom around just being yourself rather than fitting into what it means to be a girl or what it means to be a boy. Now, like, you need to be these things to be a boy and you need to be these things to be a girl. Where in the 70s it was much freer. So I kind of want us to remember that as feminists, that those gender boundaries were just much looser in when I was growing up than they are now. So if I had to imagine being her, I think she feels like she has to do things for her society that she may or may not want to do. In some parts she might like, other parts she doesn't. She seemed conflicted to me. This is called Camp. It's based on a photo I took when I was a 12-year-old at camp. I had one of those little Instamatic cameras with the cartridge film, and I had taken it with me to camp that summer. And it was a very formative time for me. I remember one occasion where I had gone back to the cabin to rest. I wasn't feeling well, opted out of some activity. I was laying on the top bunk, and this group of girls came in, and they started talking about me. What do you think of that girl, Lizzie? And the consensus was pretty negative. They didn't like me very much, and they didn't know I was there listening. And I was really hurt. I remember this to this day, how I felt after hearing that. Some time later, this group of girls was outside the cabins, and I snapped a picture of them bullying another girl. So you can see the one girl in the white on the right, her arms are being held back, and these two girls are lording over her, and the group of three on the right is trying to decide whether they're comfortable with what's going on here or not. And I just thought it really, looking back on it, I'm like, wow, it just really captured some 12-year-old girl dynamic there, and decided to make this painting of it. I tried really hard not to paint it. I mean, that sounds like a funny thing to say, but painting it without articulating it, just getting enough there and paying attention to the beauty of the paint itself and the colors and the feelings in the paint and not just the content. One of the techniques I've developed is painting almost entirely with a palette knife and manipulating the paint with mineral spirits. So I'll apply the paint thickly in particular areas and then blend them together using mineral spirits, and then add more paint in and take more paint out with paper towels. And that mechanism that technique creates a modeled surface that I enjoy. So I actually had an interaction with a coworker in my day job where we disagreed about something and got in kind of a tiff. And the next day I brought her a print of this painting. And because I thought we were kind of acting like 12-year-old girls. And the consciousness of what goes on at that age, and when you're trying things out and realizing when you're hurting somebody, you just start to become conscious of that at that age. And I'm not sure a 12-year-old looking at this would understand it, but certainly an adult remembering being 12 would be able to put it in better context and relate to it.